Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Coach's Approach podcast, where we take an inside look at the high school coaching world. As always, I'm your host, George Gresco. Today's episode, Talking with Thom, is brought to you by Coach's Dry Rub, the All-American Rub, laid on thick until it sticks, the Well Bar and Grill in Kirtland. Come on in for some good food and a great time. Anthony's Family Restaurant in Eastlake on the corner of 91 and Vine Street, where together is our favorite place to be. Open for dine-in, carry-out, and curbside pickup. Last but not least, G&G Printing. Get your custom apparel printed in 7 to 10 days or less. Dominate your design. Today in the coach's booth, we have legendary and Hall of Fame coach, Coach Thom McDaniels. Coach, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. Coach, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the McDaniels coaching tree, if you will. Not only have you yourself had an amazing coaching career, but you have been gifted to be able to watch your sons, Ben and Josh, coach on Sundays in the NFL. Your son, Ben, is with the Houston Texans as their passing game coordinator, I still believe. And your son, Josh, is going into his first year as the Las Vegas Raiders head coach. Would you say coaching is in the McDaniels' blood?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that, and I think I detected that early, in them as boys. They wanted to be at practice. This is when they're in grade school, and they were allowed to come to two-a-days at about age 4 or 5, as long as they behaved and they didn't get in the way.
Sure.
The evening meal, getting them to finish and clean the plate and eat the dinner, that was always encouraged by, if you want to go to two-a-days tomorrow morning.
Right.
That's all the incentive that they needed. But I think they fell in love with the game early. I think that happens, probably routinely with a lot of coaches' kids.
Sure.
I also think that being around the game, even as little kids, and being around the players and in the locker room, I think that always enhances a coach's kids' football IQ.
Sure.
So they were exposed to the game early. They fell in love with it early, and nothing that they did was going to surprise me. But I never expected this. There was never any conversation about them, following in Dad's footsteps and,
Sure.
and coaching in the league. That was never part of the conversation. And at some point when they, were in high school and soon to graduate, Josh to John Carroll and Ben to Kent, they wanted to play. They wanted to continue to play. But in the back of their mind, they knew at some point the playing days were going to end, and that they wanted to coach. And at some point, I realized that maybe, if that's what you want to do, you might want to pursue college coaching.
Sure.
I can't remember what inspired me to tell him that, but there was something maybe going on with public education that gave me pause about going into high school coaching. And so they both took the advice. Ben got a graduate assistantship with Nick Saban at Michigan State.
Yeah, you can't say I have a better coach to learn from.
And Ben got a graduate assistantship with Glenn Mason at Minnesota.
Wow.
And those are household names, in coaching circles. And as the head coach at McKinley, recruiters from all across the country came through that building. They knew that routinely McKinley produced Division I football players. And so I got to know a lot of people. And so we applied a lot of places. Ben got one offer and Josh got one offer. He only needed one.
Right. Yeah.
And Josh's was with Nick and Ben's was with Glenn Mason. And, so that led to what maybe being a low-level, entry-level college guy.
Right.
Josh is, other than helping me at McKinley, his first coaching experience, other than being a GA for Nick, was going to New England as an entry-level guy,
Right.
for Coach Belichick. And Ben took a little longer to get to the NFL,
Sure.
but yeah, I mean, we never dreamed when they were little that it would end up like this, but it's a big thrill for me, obviously.
Absolutely. Now, Coach, I want to know who is the most competitive.
That's a really good question, and you sent me the list of questions, and I started thinking about it. All I know is that we've been competitive forever, and I'm including my wife in this.
Sure.
We were a church-going family, and there was always a moment in church where the pastor would offer us an opportunity to show a sign of peace, to the other worshipers, the other parishioners.
Sure.
We competed to see who would shake the most hands, and we're talking middle school and grade school. They were young.
I love it.
Yeah, and Dad figured that game out a little earlier, and I always sat on the end of the pew. So I'd get out and I'd work forward an aisle or two or backward an aisle or two, and they were seated inside of me, and they couldn't do that.
Too funny.
So I proclaim myself the winner on a weekly basis, but we competed at anything,
Sure.
we turn anything into a game. And again, that's part of my wife's DNA, and that's part of my DNA.
No, that's fantastic. As a father, how proud are you getting to watch your sons fulfill their dreams of coaching the NFL? Because they watched you growing up coaching, and now they're in the NFL. How cool is that? How proud are you as a father?
I don't know if I can define, that kind of pride. All they ever wanted to do was play football for Canton, McKinley, and then all they ever wanted to do was, play in college and coach somewhere at some point. And as I indicated earlier, there was never any conversation about them ending up in the NFL.
Right.
But they did. One thing that I advise them to do, and anybody else who's, trying to launch a young career, whatever job they give you is the most important job that you have.
Sure.
So if that's picking somebody up at the airport, a recruit, or a coach coming in to speak at a clinic, then you got to do that better than that's ever been done before.
Right.
If they're telling you to make coffee, then you do that better than it's ever been done before. And that was the final bit of advice that I gave Josh at Michigan State, working for Nick, and Glenn working at Minnesota for Glenn Mason. And I also told them, this is where your old man's influence ends. I can't help you anymore in the coaching gig, because now it becomes Nick Saban. That's the guy whose recommendation matters. The old man's recommendation is meaningless at this point.
Sure.
That's Glenn Mason's recommendation. That's the guy you have to impress. That's the guy you gotta please. If you're gonna stay with them and move up, within the ranks, or whether you're gonna go from where you are now to somewhere else. So those are the people you need to please, and I think they took that advice.
Absolutely, and as they should. I mean, learning from Saban and all the coaches that they've been around, that you can't be around any better coaches.
No.
Now, I read in an article, I didn't send you this, but I read in an article that the city of Canton honored you and the McDaniels family with a street name called McDaniels Way. How cool is that for you and your family getting a street named after you? Because that doesn't happen every day.
No, that doesn't happen every day, and that happened earlier this spring. It was an idea brought about by a city councilman, in the city of Canton, they're actually going to dedicate the signs, and whenever we can get Ben and Josh to find a day free, between now and the end of next season,
right?
To get in Canton at the same time with me, they're going to do a little dedication. But it starts if you're familiar with Canton, this will be meaningful to you. And if you're not, it doesn't much matter. But it starts in what is called Stadium Park, which is below the Hall of Fame and below and a little bit north and east of the high school.
Sure.
And it comes under Route 77. It passes the Hall of Fame, passes the stadium, and it passes the Canton Fieldhouse.
Sure.
And that little stretch is going to be called McDaniels Way. So, we all think that's a big deal, and
Yeah.
everybody expected it. But, we had some success, here. They've had success beyond McKinley High School. Josh has got all those Super Bowl trophies.
Yeah.
but he came from somewhere, and it's we're very grateful because the city of Canton has recognized, I think what they have done more than what the old man has done. But it's a really fine gesture on their part. We're thrilled for that.
Absolutely. I mean, what a better place, right? Canton, home of football. Essentially, it's the mecca of sports. The Football Hall of Fame. That's fantastic. Really is. Coach, you have been coaching now for 40 plus years and counting. You still work with quarterbacks and whatnot on the side. This is probably the hardest question that I have on the sheet. If you were to define what a winner is, what would you say a winner is?
Well, I think at one point, in our lives as coaches and maybe as kids and as guys who competed, we thought winning meant everything about the final score.
Sure.
And in our game, if we got more points than you have, then we were declared the winner. But I think as I grew up as a kid and as I grew up as an assistant coach, and I played for Hall of Fame coaches and I coached for Hall of Fame coaches, and I was learning all that time. But I think that eventually we understood that it wasn't just about the outcome.
Right.
Certainly, that was hopeful, and we wanted the outcome that we wanted, but we figured out that it was, Nick Saban talks about the process, and back when I figured that out, we didn't call it that, and that's a common way to refer to it now. But it was all about the means to the end, and not just the end.
Right.
And I think winners are aware of that.
Sure.
And whether they get the outcome they want or not, they're doing all the things that give you the best chance to get the outcome you want. Whether that's in the off-season program, whether that's in the academic assist program that you have for your student athletes, whether it's visiting places in the spring, and not just during clinic time, visiting places and learning more, in bowl practices. I did all of those things, because coaching's a journey. It's not a destination, and I never knew it all. I'm still learning, and so to me, winning is understanding that.
Sure.
And attempting to do, just like I told my kids, whatever job they give you to do, that's the most important job that you have. Well, as a coach, whatever we were doing right now was the most important thing that we were doing.
Sure.
So we were scouting on a Friday night because we had a Saturday evening game, and we had a lot of those at McKinley and Warren Harding. We had a lot of Saturday games. Well, then that was the most important part of our job.
Sure.
If overseeing the dynamic warm up at the beginning of practice, if that's what we were doing, that was the most important thing that we had to do at that particular time until we moved on to the next thing. So to me, if you do things like that, if you just buy into the idea that whatever you happen to be doing in the world of coaching at that moment is the most important thing, you're probably going to get better at it.
Absolutely.
And it's going to benefit every other phase of coaching that you become a part of. So to me, it's that's what winning is. And I think that's what gives you the outcome that you want.
Sure.
That approach is going to get it for you, more often than not. But it was all about, the journey and not about the destination. The quality journey gets you the destination that you're looking for.
Absolutely. Coach, we're going to get a little into your coaching career now. Speaking of winning, you were a head coach for 26 years at 3 different high schools, Canton, McKinley, Warren Harding, and then Massillon Jackson. You have an overall record of 209 wins and 81 losses. How did you get people to buy into your program and what you were trying to accomplish?
I learned early, when you're coaching at Canton McKinley and you're coaching at Warren Harding and in Jackson also, you're coaching against quality opposition. McKinley had a storied history and tradition before I arrived, and so did Warren Harding. But because we were playing quality opposition, we had to understand that in order to match up to that quality opposition, okay, what do I have to do to help us meet that that responsibility? And so I learned X's and O's as much as I could, as often as I could. But I focused in on an offensive philosophy and a defensive approach, and to some extent, I think we were ahead of the game in one regard, and that was with regard and respect for special teams play. But while I wanted to learn as much as I could from an X and O standpoint, what I really believe that I did to help our cause was to provide structure and order and direction and discipline.
Absolutely.
Those kids at Canton McKinley and Warren Harding, they could run like crazy and they get anything to move.
Yeah.
And so if we can get kids that are physically tough and gifted and faster more often than bigger than other people, and we could be disciplined and structured and organized and we sold team. I think those are the things that allowed kids to buy in. We never over celebrated an individual, and I had a lot of great individual players, but we never over celebrated them at the expense of the team. If we were giving them helmet decals, they were for team achievements.
Absolutely.
Maurice Claret could run for 250 yards and 4 touchdowns, but he only got a decal if we won, or if the offensive team achieved the goals that the offensive team, had. The special teams guys, if we achieved the special teams goals, then those guys got a sticker for the helmet. But in every way that we could, we were going to celebrate team, and we were going to respect and honor team and reward team.
Sure.
And that's not as hard to accomplish as some people think. Those kids bought in and they believed in that. Even the best of the best, the quote star players, they were just another guy in the locker room, and it wasn't impossible to get those guys to buy into that.
Sure. Coach, you've had many honors and have hit many coaching accolades. You've been the Coach of the Year in Division I. You've been a National Coach of the Year. You've won state and national championships. Is there one honor or accolade that kind of sticks out more than others to you?
I think the one that maybe is most meaningful to me is twice I was in the Final Four for the NFL High School Coach of the Year, and that only happened because Mike Doss and Antonio Hall from McKinley, and they had been in the NFL. Michael for a little longer period of time than Antonio, and they nominated me. And then at Warren Harding, it was Mario Manningham that nominated me. And so there's real good players that apparently had a good enough experience as a high school guy,
right,
playing for me, that when they were presented with that opportunity, that's why it's meaningful.
Yeah,
it's meaningful to me as it is, because we gave them direction and organization and focus and all that. But I mean, they were really gifted players that bought into what we were selling. And at some point later in their lives, they realized, well, hey, I got a guy that I think is worthy of this, and they nominated me. So it didn't matter that I didn't win the award. The fact that I was nominated 2 different times, near the end of my career by former players.
Right.
That's probably as meaningful as anything.
Absolutely. And we always talk about it's the relationships. It's what happens after they're done playing for you. And just to have those still relationships, and then for them to nominate you, that's all in one, that's perfect. That's
as good as it gets.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you got hired at Canton McKinley as their head football coach in 1982. You spent nearly 2 decades at McKinley, racking up a record of 137-49. After I posted you were coming on the show, there was many comments and whatever, so I was reading through, but a lot of the people still say that 97 team at McKinley is one of the best teams to ever play high school football. And people still talk about that today. What do you think made that 97 team so special?
Well, 2 things. The senior group in 97 and the junior group in 97, they were both undefeated as freshmen. Wow. And whoever we were playing on the varsity schedule, they were playing on the freshman schedule. So we had back-to-back undefeated classes. And until 1994, we were a 3-year high school.
Right.
We didn't have freshmen in the building. And
sure.
So getting freshmen in the building was a huge thing for us, because we got our hands on them 1 year sooner, and we got them, the culture became clear to them 1 year sooner, and we had no input into the 4 middle schools in Kansas City at the time, because there were 2 high schools, Timken and McKinley, and we had no input because they didn't want any recruiting to occur. So we did a feeder system, but getting kids as freshmen was a big deal, and we knew there were talented guys in both classes. There were going to be D1 prospects, and there were also a bunch of other guys that were going to be really good high school football players who weren't D1 prospects. But we knew that was coming. And in 1996, with the one group is sophomores and the one group is juniors, I think we went 11-2, and 2 losses were to Ignatius, one in the regular season and one in the playoffs. And the one in the playoffs, we staged a comeback, which when Iggy got you down, you didn't come back.
Yeah.
They had to have it happen, and we made a game of it. And I think that we knew then, in that locker room at the Rubber Bowl post game, that okay, we can compete with, and we were playing the best of the best. That's something I believed in.
Yeah.
We were independent at the time. And so we're going to schedule the very best people to make us better.
Especially when you guys are playing in Division I, there's no reason to schedule pancakes. Because you're going to eventually see them down the line in the playoffs.
Well, and I didn't believe that if you didn't experience that level of competition during the season, you weren't going to be able to. I don't believe in stepping up.
Yeah.
That's not something I believe in. So I think that we had to compete during the season to prepare us for that kind of competition. So they were talented, they were good young, they all bought in, and we won those back-to-backs in 97 and 98. And it was a product of all of that. Most significantly, they were talented, they were good kids, and they bought into the idea that the process works, and everything about there's a phrase I had: nothing about football is unimportant. and we sold that, and that's so if it has anything to do with the game, then it's important.
Sure.
And so I think all of those things went into those 2 state championship teams.
Absolutely. In that 97 season, you went through some powerhouses in the playoffs to win a state championship and overall national championship that season. You went through North Canton Hoover, Toledo St. Francis de Sales, St. Ignatius, Archbishop Moeller. Can you talk about that playoff run? Because you were facing some teams,
Yeah. Well, it goes back to about week 7 or 8 during the regular season. and we're playing Iggy at home, and we're undefeated, and they're undefeated. And I got to back up. In May of that year, I heard from the guy from USA Today that used to be in charge of the high school national rankings.
Sure.
He notified me in May that we were going to be the number one preseason ranked team in the nation.
Wow.
And so at the end of school meeting in May, I told the kids, I said, this is going to happen in August. And I made a phone call to Chuck Kyle because he'd been in that position before. And I said,
Sure.
okay. And he's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
I said, how do you handle this? He said, well, it's an honor, but it isn't an achievement unless you do it.
Yeah.
And he says it's a great position to be in because if you don't lose, nobody's passing you.
Sure.
He says if you're number two and number one never loses, you can't gain on him. He says so. It's a great
Yeah.
So I said this is a great opportunity, and it's going to be an honor in August before we play a game, but we can make this an achievement if we want to. And then we never talked about it again.
Right.
And we went back to that process oriented, doing the little things well. We also bought into an approach where we wanted to measure up to a standard of excellence,
Sure.
in how we played. So we won 42-6, but we had 17 missed tackles. That wasn't good enough.
Yep.
If we had 11 penalties, that wasn't good enough. Then, I had something I called a mistakes chart.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't very good at celebrating wins because our focus was on us. And oh, by the way, we got an opponent that we're going to play, on Friday. We spent more time evaluating our last game than we did preparing for the next opponent.
Right.
And I believe in that because even in an overwhelming win, there are things that we can do better. And the question always was, did we play well enough to beat the best team that we have yet to play?
Yep.
And the answer was always no. And we beat Massillon to finish the regular season 10-0, and I got held up in a post-game interview on the field. When I went in the locker room, there was no celebration. We won, but they weren't happy with the way they played.
Right.
And I knew then that we got something.
Absolutely. No, that's awesome. Those are the stories that you remember forever. That's the good stuff.
There's no question.
Now, Coach, how special was it for you to win your first state championship that year?
It was huge because I was part of the staff in '81 when we won a state championship. I was an assistant coach. And,
Sure.
And, you know how that is.
Yeah.
Once you win a state championship, that becomes the standard.
Yeah. Yep.
To the community and to the school and to the fan base. So the next year, my first year in '82, we went 8-2. We lost to Moeller, we lost to Massillon, and they played for the state championship game.
Right.
Well, that nobody celebrated 8-2,
Right.
and losing to two storied programs,
Yeah.
who ended up playing for the state championship. And I was learning how to be a head coach, and I think I transitioned through that learning curve more slowly than I want to admit to.
Right.
But I don't think I really figured out, the head coaching gig until, the 90s, the beginning of the 90s. I don't like to admit to that, but,
Right.
and thankfully, people supported me and stood behind me,
Right.
and were loyal to me. But having won it as an assistant in '81, it was important to win another one sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you're always itching to win another one. I won one as an assistant coach in 2018. I coached over at Canton High School,
Sure.
and once you win one, you wanna win another one.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's in '90 where I transitioned from being the outcome based guy to the journey guy.
Right.
I think that's when that transition in me as a head coach occurred.
Sure.
And we started following the right path at that particular time.
Sure. After the 1997 championship season, as we just mentioned, you stepped away from coaching for nearly 3 years. What made you leave the coaching world after winning the state title?
This is a crazy story. So we win the state title, and the athletic director at the time retires at the end of December.
Okay.
So about a week after, actually it was the week of the Moeller game, the superintendent approaches me and he offers me that position.
Okay.
And so I'm going to go from an English teacher teaching 4 classes a day, with 2 duties, making $45,000, and I'm going to double it, and I'm going to make an administrative salary, and I'm in the 26th year, and we all know how the state teacher retirement system works, and so in my mind I wasn't ready to get out of coaching, but I thought this is a financial opportunity that I can't turn down.
Sure.
And so that was the motivation, but I couldn't be the head, the athletic director with 2 high schools and 4 middle schools and coach the McKinley football team. They wouldn't let you do that at that time.
Right.
So I made the decision, and 6 months into it, I'm miserable because I'm dealing with adults all the time and kids not at all, and that's not really what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So 6 months into that job, I started looking for high school head coaching opportunities.
Sure.
And interviewed a couple of places, and Princeton was one of them. Glen Oak was one of them. It didn't work for whatever reason, but then 2 years later,
Yep.
Warren Harding opens, and I called the guy at Warren Harding as the AD, and I said, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you about that job." And lo and behold, they were able to make it work, and I took a huge pay cut, to go from the athletic administrator for Kansas City Schools to an assistant AD's role at Warren Harding, but it was worth it.
Sure.
And those 7 years in Warren were great years for me.
Absolutely. And that's what I was going to get into next. I said, after taking those 3 years off of coaching, you still had to have the itch and the desire to coach, because in 2000, you got hired as the head football coach at Warren Harding. And you had an amazing coaching career with a record of 63 wins and 21 losses while at Harding. This was now your second head coaching job, as we mentioned. Was there anything you had done differently getting your second head coaching job compared to when you had your first one?
I actually think that I did a better job of head coaching at Warren Harding than I did at Canton McKinley.
Sure.
And I had the benefit of the McKinley experience. I had the benefit of 2 years of being away, and I think those 2 things let me function better sooner at Warren Harding, than I did at Canton McKinley. And one of the things that I did, I mentioned earlier that I was not a guy that celebrated victories as much as I should have.
Right.
And I didn't let other people celebrate them either, because I was obsessed with the mistakes that we made, even though we won.
Sure.
And that was the mistake. So I tried to do that differently at Warren Harding. A couple of different things, and the guys coaching for me would look at, or if they're listening, they're not buying it, because but 2 things, we sort of adopted the 24-hour rule, where if we won, we were going to be happy for 24 hours, and then I was going to be miserable. Then I was going to make everybody miserable. and the other thing that I made myself do is, regardless of whether we won or lost, and this is from the McKinley experience and being out of coaching, on Monday, regardless of the outcome, I was going to share with the kids 5 things that I liked about how we played.
Right.
And 5 things that I didn't like. And whether we won or lost, I was going to find 5 things to praise them about and credit them with. And none of it was individual. If we lost, but we had only 2 penalties and 6 missed tackles, then those were going to be 2 of the things that I was going to bring up and talk to them about and encourage them that, that kind of thing. But instead of being that negative guy and dwelling on what we did wrong, I made myself give the kids credit for things that we did well, regardless of the outcome. And I think that was a healthier approach. They responded quickly, they bought in quickly, and we had great success sooner as a result.
No, I like that. In 2003 at Harding, the team went 11-1 overall and earned the Associated Press state championship. Can you talk a little bit about that specific season?
Yeah. Well, the 2002 season, we were state runner-up.
Yep.
We lost to Elder, and that was the only loss. And that was a march through the playoffs that was really tough too. But we had a bunch of guys back on that 2003 team, and we were always believers in playing young kids if they indicated that they were capable.
Right.
We whether they were special team players or part-time starters, we didn't care how old they were. We didn't care whether they could drive cars or not. If they were good enough, we were going to play them. And so we had a history of doing that. So even though that 2002 team was really good, we had a bunch of guys back on that 2003 team. And we had a great run through the regular season. We beat St. Ed's at St. Ed's in a great game.
That's not easy to do.
and then we lost to them in the rematch in Fawcett Stadium, and we had a bad night.
Yeah,
they played really well and they deserved to win, but we had an uncharacteristically bad night, especially offensively, and they deserved to win, and the right team did win.
Sure. After the 2006 season at Harding, you go on to take another head coaching job. You got hired at Massillon Jackson in 2007, but you were only there for 2 seasons. At that point, after those 2 seasons, what made you want to hang up your whistle and, step away from the game essentially?
Okay, well, when I left Harding, I had 35 years in teaching and coaching.
Sure.
And so I retired as a teacher coach, and also at that time, my mom and dad, who still lived here in Canton, they were in failing health.
Sure.
My sister lived in Baltimore, my brother lived in Seattle, and I needed to come back home because they needed me to be at least a part-time caregiver, if not more. And so I functioned at Jackson as just the football coach. I didn't teach, and I got a coaching stipend, and that was all. But I was here. I was back in Stark County, and
Sure.
and I had an opportunity to do things for my mom and dad, during the school day, and the rest of the school year that I couldn't from as far away as Warren Harding.
Right.
The 2 years at Jackson were great. It was a totally different environment from, the inner city school settings that I had in Canton and Warren. And I enjoyed that immensely. But 2 years after coming back, my mom and dad needed more of me
Sure.
than I could afford to give them as a head coach.
Right.
I was even though I didn't have a teaching position, I took kids out of study hall and strength trained them, instead of them being in study hall, they were with me. So I had a bigger teaching load without being a teacher than I ever had. But their failing health, that required me to sort of step away from the head coaching gig. And I became an assistant coach for Jim McQuaid and Solon. But, the assistant coach role isn't as extensive. It's not as large. It's not as all encompassing as the head coaching role. So that's why I stepped away from Jackson. The people were wonderful to me. I loved the kids. They were tougher than I thought they would be.
Yep.
But I didn't leave on bad terms. I left on good terms, but that's what prompted that.
And after all those years that your parents took you to all the practices and games, and then now is your time to pay it back. So that's amazing, Coach.
Yeah. Dad used to video our games.
Yeah.
And that was, I probably didn't appreciate that as much as I should have, but I remember him standing on the top of the press box at Stambaugh Stadium in Youngstown, and it's like 28 degrees,
Yeah.
windy, and then I got my 75-year-old dad upset.
Right.
But he wanted to contribute, be part of the program. But yeah, we do those things.
That's awesome. 6 years later, after stepping away from the game almost completely, you mentioned you were assistant coach here and there, but you returned to Canton McKinley to be their head coach in 2014. But you were only there for one season. What made you come back, and what kind of went on over that 1 year?
Well, I was an assistant coach at multiple places, and I was weaning myself out of football.
Sure.
I couldn't quit cold turkey. So I was 2 years at Stolen. I was a year at Masson. I was a year at Glen Oak, and I was trying to wean myself out of football. Plus, I had two guys that were either in major colleges or in the NFL.
Sure.
And there was that little tug to see them do what they did and see grandkids. I got a bunch of grandkids now too. So I stepped away, and I didn't coach at all in 2013. The head coach at McKinley resigned sort of late in the spring, or maybe it was March, I think. And so that's late to maybe look for a head coach. And so the superintendent, who played for me at one point, he reached out and wanted to know if I'd come back and take the position. It wasn't ever going to be a long-term thing.
Right.
I certainly planned to be there more than 1 year. I think the agreement we had it wasn't a 3-year contract, but I was going to try to be their guy, for 3 years. And in the meantime, we're going to either groom the next guy from within the staff,
Right.
or they're going to look for a guy. But what I found out in 2014 was that I wasn't the guy that I used to be.
Right.
I didn't have the stamina physically,
Right.
and I didn't have the stamina, mentally and psychologically that I did for most of all those other years.
Right.
And I realize, and I have no problem admitting to this, but it's a young man's game,
Yeah.
and I wasn't a young man anymore. So I stepped away after one season, and that was the reason why.
Sure.
There was somebody that could do the job better than me, and I decided that they needed to find who that was.
No, that's got to be a hard thing to do. You've been coaching or been around the game. It's just a step away. That's a tough decision to make. After the 2014 season, you officially retired from coaching high school football. What's life like now for Coach Thom McDaniels?
Well, I'm a guy that while I was coaching structure and direction and whatever, I function best when I have that kind of life. So once I stop coaching, I'm looking for something to do, because I can't wake up. I'm an early riser. I can't wake up and look at all day with nothing to do.
Right.
So I cut grass at a local public blue collar golf course.
Oh, there you go. And
this is the 13th season, golf season that I'll cut grass. But it was perfect for me as an early riser. We start at 6 a.m. to get ahead of the golfers, and we're done by noon or 1. And then I just got the afternoon and the evening to deal with without a routine.
And then that's when you play probably 18 holes.
Well, yeah, I'm a terrible golfer, and I can play for free and don't play.
Yeah.
The knee injuries and the shoulder injury have something to do with that. But I should have started playing as a young man. It's a great game, and I wish I was good at it. My sons are pretty good, but that's a lot of it. And then we've got 8 grandkids, and so we can never see enough of them, especially when 7 of them live away. There's only one of them that lives here in Suffolk County, and the other 7 we gotta go and travel to see them. So that pretty much fills my day.
No, that's awesome, Coach. As we near the end of the show, Coach, I always ask this to everyone that's on the show, and it's a pretty broad question. Who is Coach McDaniels for the listeners and viewers who might not know you? Who is Coach Thom McDaniels?
I'm a guy that loved the game. I grew up in Orville. I played for two Hall of Fame coaches, and Bill Schunflower and Mo Tipton, fell in love with the game as a young guy, was mediocre at best as a player. My sons were far better football players than I ever hoped to be, but it didn't diminish my love for the game. So I'm a guy that loved the game, and somewhere along the line, we came to believe that if you love the game will love you back.
Yep.
And I'm a firm believer that happened in my coaching life. I loved the game, and I loved every single part of it. And I got the ball bounced my way more often than it did anybody else's way. I'm the luckiest guy I know as a coach. But I think that part of that is because I believed in that if you love the game will love you back. I'm a family guy. We mentioned the word relationships a while ago. Yep. The guys who were my assistant coaches at McKinley, for that long stretch, that long period of years, we vacationed together at Siesta Key, Florida, every spring.
Man, you're gonna have to bring me for that trip this year.
Well, you'd be welcome to come. We gather in a local establishment called Lobies here in Canton every Thursday, and we tell the same old stories and laugh at the same old jokes. But there's a bond that we have as guys who worked with each other and together, for 16 years that just is unbroken. So I always believed in keeping your circle small, and I always made people earn their right into the circle. But I'm devoted to the people that were in that. There were a lot of people that were very good to me and very supportive and did a lot of things to help the program and help me and my family. And so I'm very grateful. I'm grateful, for the success we had. I'm grateful for all the kids I got to coach, whether they were D1 prospects or not. There were a lot of kids that gave it up, wherever I happened to be, and I'm fortunate, I'm blessed. So other than that, I'm just a guy that cuts grass at a golf course.
Too funny. Well, Coach, to wrap things up, I really appreciate you coming on the show and spending some time with me. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. It's always fun for me to get to talk about the game. It's fun for me to answer questions and reminisce about the experience. And I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely.
This doesn't happen to me that often at this point in my life, but
sure.
This is something that I appreciate. My kids will get a kick out of this too.
Yeah, absolutely. To have them retweet this and tweet it out, Facebook it.
Thank you very much.
Yep,
Appreciate that.
Yeah, I also want to thank all of our listeners and viewers. They've been great. Continue to like and share on all of our social media and all of our content on there. But that's going to do it for today's episode of the Coach's Approach podcast. Please tune in next week. As always, I'm George Gresco, and we'll see you guys later.
Thank you very much.